both Christians who think that that is what atheism leads to, and atheists who happen to think that way. So as I pointed out, that there's a good consequence, namely, it's good for society that the atheists in society don't all realize, hey, I can go do whatever I want. There's nothing that really makes something right or wrong. It's a lot of what we think of as right and wrong would, on an atheist worldview, be a kind of a matter of taste preference. Like you prefer one kind of ice cream, I prefer a different kind of ice cream. It would be good in that sense that it would be a pretty rough world if everyone's just going out doing whatever they feel like doing. So it's good that many atheists still believe there is right and wrong, even though their worldview cannot support that. The bad side of it is, the bad side of thinking that atheism can be consistent with objective moral values, that is, moral values that are true regardless of our opinions about them, is that atheists really don't grapple with the need for God as a sort of foundation, as a ground for moral values, and so they're missing part of the big picture and the most important part of the picture. Here again, I understand if you're disagreeing with me. We're going to spend this entire program discussing this issue point by point, really trying to get our minds around this to see if we're right. And again, feel free to call us, challenge us, disagree with us, tell us we're wrong, make fun of us. And if you want to make fun of someone, you could especially do that with my guest this evening. I have my friend Paul Rizkallah on the line. Paul, do you hear me?
I hear you better, David.
That day was not magical for me.
So, how you doing, Paul?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Now, Paul, you are like me in that you are both a philosopher and an apologist. So, could you sort of break down? Lots of people they hear the term philosophy, but it's taking on kind of a term like kind of a connotation like, well, that's your philosophy of life, sort of what you believe about the world. But what would be? How are we using the term philosopher?
Yes, so when I use the word philosopher, or the term philosophy, it's essentially a tool, a way of thinking, a methodology of looking at the world that takes critical analysis seriously and puts presuppositions under the microscope. We scrutinize anything and everything that can be scrutinized. So that takes even elements of Christian faith and doctrine, and we hold it up to the light and we see if these things really do hold water. So as a Christian and a philosopher, we take the elements of creation, sure, the existence of God, and we see things are we justified in this sort of thing?
Now, philosophy, for those of you who, again, if this is new to you, if you're thinking, no, I prefer science or something like that, science used to be part of philosophy. Mathematics used to be part of philosophy. Basically, in the ancient Greek world, knowledge and various positions on different things, they were handed down by tradition. So you believed what your elders told you about the world. And so they would tell you stories, and these would get passed down by tradition. And so you listened to the elders or to whoever spoke with authority. But there arose certain people who said, no, we can actually figure things out about the world, and we can go and try to make hypotheses and test them and so on. And so you ended up with these groups called philosophers. And if you read what they were coming up with, this is some wild, often very silly stuff. But they were trying to figure out and really understand the world. And as time went on, different branches of understanding would sort of break off and form their own field of knowledge. So science eventually has enough in itself that it doesn't need to be part of philosophy anymore. For a time, science was called natural philosophy. It was sort of the philosophy of the natural world. And then, so science breaks off as natural philosophy, but then you end up with different fields becoming, having enough content to form, biology and physics and so on. So philosophy is really just trying to understand things. And it's sort of connected to apologetics, in that both philosophers and apologists would try to give evidence for their positions and try to reason to the correct position. But the term apologist has kind of a negative connotation with many people. I don't know why. The term comes, it's used in the Bible, 1 Peter 3:15, where we are commanded to give a defense for what we believe, and that give a defense there is apologion, which is where we get our word apologetics from. And so apologetics is giving a reasoned defense of Christianity. And so it's weird that this is used as kind of a negative sense. Oh, he's an apologist or something like that, because you have atheists who say, oh, Christians just believe everything by faith, and then you having, no, here we are, we're commanded to give a reasoned defense, and they say, oh, you're just an apologist. What do you want us to do? If a Christian says, oh, we believe it by faith, you say, oh, that's ridiculous and absurd. And if we say we're apologists, and you say, oh, that's just you bunch of silly guys trying to defend your ghost in the sky and things like that. But these things can overlap. So in philosophy, there is a field. It's moral philosophy, dealing with the ethics, dealing with the foundations of ethics and morality. And in Christianity, this would play an important role as well. These things overlap, and so this is why we have Paul here, because his interests overlap in this area as well. Now, Paul, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, the moral argument for the existence of God. We want to play a video by Dr. Craig here in a moment. If you're not familiar with Dr. William Lane Craig out there, some people love him, some people hate him. You could examine his material. But on the moral argument, I don't see why. I certainly don't see why Christians would object to his case for the moral argument. Christians have disagreements on different things. But Paul, give us the idea of the moral argument for God's existence, because people hear about different arguments for God's existence. And just to clarify, everyone out there, when we say argument, we're not using it in the terms of yelling and screaming at each other. Argument is any time you are trying to present reasons for believing something, and you're saying, here, my conclusion follows from what I just said. So right now we are arguing in the sense, not the sense, the negative sense, but in the sense that we are trying to give you reasons for what we're saying. But Paul, people hear about different kinds of arguments. What would be the idea of the moral argument for God's existence?
Well, the moral argument actually enjoys a rich history of defense from different theists going back to Augustine. So we have Augustine, then we also have later formulations from people in the Enlightenment. We have even Immanuel Kant. Essentially, the moral argument wants to say that God is the best explanation for morality in the world. So the moral argument isn't saying, like you said before, that we need to believe in God in order to be moral or to carry out moral acts, but that God, if there were no God, then morality as a feature of the world could not exist. So, for example, here I have a book. Anyone can read this book so long as they have a knowledge of letters and syntax and English. So if we say morality is like a book, both atheists and Christians believe the book. The question we're trying to ask and answer is, can the book exist without an author? Okay? And atheists will, yes, we can have morality, we can have the book. And atheists will say, no, if there is no God, if there is no author of the book of morality, then there can be no such thing. So there are different versions of it, but essentially the moral argument wants to take God as the best explanation for moral facts in the world, objective moral facts. So rape is wrong, taking care of children is good, and these are objectively true. It's not up to the subject, it's not up to the culture to define what is right and what's wrong. These are real facts, these are real features of the world, that rape is always wrong, that taking care of your children is good, and that these moral facts that hold objectively, that wouldn't be true of the world. We can't have things like if there weren't.
All right, now moral facts, that can be kind of tricky to get our minds around, because it's a different kind of fact from the sky is blue or something like that, something that we can go out and test. You don't look around at the world and grab a microscope or a telescope and come across the moral law, rape is wrong. So it's a different kind of experience. But I'm going to use a couple of philosophical terms right now: realist and anti-realist. Realist and anti-realist. Just for our purposes now, a realist is someone who would believe that some sort of experience corresponds to something real, something that's out there. There is something real and out there that is the basis of this. An anti-realist would be someone who says, you know, that's kind of some kind of illusion. So, for instance, we look around and we have an experience of the external world. So I look around, I see cameras right now, I see studio lights and things like that. If I'm a realist about this sense experience, it means that I believe that there's actually lights out there. There are actually cameras out there. If I were an anti-realist, I might think this is all some kind of illusion, or there's some crazy scientist and I'm in his lab and he's actually poking my brain with things, making me think I see all these things when I'm really not. Or if I thought that I was in the Matrix right now, I could think none of this around me is real. That would be a kind of anti-realism. But Paul, so since moral experience is a different kind of thing, why should we think that there are moral facts to begin with?
Well, like you said, on the basis of experience, we experience moral facts. When we think about, when we ask ourselves, for example, is torturing children for fun wrong? We have this intuition, we have this first reaction, gut response. The answer is, of course, torturing children for fun is wrong. And we sense this about the world. We have a deep intuition about it. We know deep down that this really is wrong. We can't put it under a microscope to evaluate it. We don't take these things to the polls and try to determine what's moral by asking people. But there are these fundamental facts that we just experience and intuit about the world. Rape is wrong, torturing children for fun is wrong, and on the basis of this small experience, we justify believing that there are these facts in the same way that we have sense experience, touching a bus book, the world, it's a future world. I have no reason to trust that sense experience. So in the same way, why should I distrust my moral experience? Prima facie, on looking at it, even with a cursory glance, I am justified in believing what my moral senses tell me, unless I have reason to doubt them. So if someone wants to argue against the thesis that there are moral facts, what they need to do is to give us good reasons why we should not trust our moral experience, to show us why we're not justified in believing what our moral experience is giving to us.
So we have experiences of different kinds. We have sensory experiences, experiences telling us that there are things out there in the world, and we have moral experiences in that we have revulsion towards certain things, and we appreciate certain things, and we think that certain things are good and certain things are bad. But the question is, are those things, is that experience real? Are those, if we say that rape is wrong, is that a true fact? In other words, it's something that's not just your opinion. If one person says rape is fine and another person says rape is wrong, is there someone who's right in that situation? And that's the kind of thing we're getting down to. If moral claims are just a matter of personal opinion, then they don't need the sort of ground that we're talking about. If you, as a Christian or atheist or Muslim or whatever, if you believe that there are actual moral facts about the world, then the question is, what is it that makes those facts facts? Because it can't just be, this is the way I think. If it's just, this is the way I think, then someone else might think differently. And it wouldn't be a fact. And so if there are moral facts, the question is, what makes those things facts? And that's what we want to get to the bottom of. We have to take a break in a few minutes. We have just enough time to watch this video by Reasonable Faith. It's a few minutes long, but Dr. Craig's going to give us the the general idea of the moral argument, and then we'll unpack things a bit. So let's go ahead and check out that video.
Can you be good without God? Let's find out. Absolutely astounding. There you have it. Undeniable proof that you can be good without believing in God. But wait, the question isn't, can you be good without believing in God? The question is, can you be good without God? See, here's the problem. If there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong? If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. And here's why. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down. God's nature provides an objective reference point for moral values. It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. But if there's no God, there's no objective reference point. All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than anyone else's viewpoint. This kind of morality is subjective, not objective. It's like a preference for strawberry ice cream. The preference is in the subject, not the object. So it doesn't apply to other people. In the same way, subjective morality applies only to the subject. It's not valid or binding for anyone else. So, in a world without God, there can be no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. God has expressed His moral nature to us as commands. These provide the basis for moral duties. For example, God's essential attribute of love is expressed in His command to love your neighbor as yourself. This command provides a foundation upon which we can affirm the objective goodness of generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality. And we can condemn as objectively evil greed, abuse, and discrimination. This raises a problem. Is something good just because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good? The answer is neither one. Rather, God wills something because He is good. God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is. Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is. But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard. So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us? No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature, highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat. If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong. The problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist. Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real, our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real. Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals. We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong for everybody, always. Is this just a personal preference or opinion? No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the moral reality every one of us experiences every day. In fact, The existence of objective morality points us directly to the existence of God.
All right, well, that was a brief introduction to the moral argument. If you disagree with either one of those premises, premises are those two statements that lead to the conclusion that God exists. There's no disputing the logic. So if you want to reject the conclusion, you have to reject one of those first statements. So if you'd like to do that, feel free to call in and tell us where the argument is wrong. But we have to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment to dig a little deeper into this argument, see if it really does what it claims to do. See you in just a moment.
ABN viewers, Trinity Channel is not only limited to New York, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, and Australia. You can now go to tct.tv, click on TCT Live, and then click on Aramaic Broadcast Network. That will take you to Trinity Channel and you can watch it 24/7. Thank you and God bless. ABN viewers, Trinity Channel is not only limited to New York, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, and North Carolina. You can view Trinity Channel on the Roku box through TCT. You can buy the Roku box from most stores around your area. If you have any questions or would like more information, please call ABN at 248-416-1300.
Welcome back to the Trinity Channel. We are discussing the moral argument for God's existence, and we're going to look at some of the ways you could reject it, some of the consequences of rejecting objective morality. But Paul, I just want to say again, because it's really odd to me. You see this in debates over and over again, where you can lay out a perfectly straightforward, logical argument, moral argument for God's existence, and you can say over and over again, "Hey, look, I'm not saying that you as an atheist can't go out and do things that we all regard as moral, that you can't go out and help people. I'm saying that on your worldview, those things are not what you think they are. They don't have the status, the sort of moral status that you think they have, and therefore there's a difficulty in your thinking. There's a confusion in your thinking." And then it seems like every time someone gets up in the Q&A, raises his hand and says, "You're saying that atheists are evil and that we're all immoral and that we're all rapists and stuff like that," when no one says that. I don't know anyone who makes that sort of claim. So there is this massive tendency to misunderstand what's being said. So again, the position is that if the natural world is all that exists, and we human beings, we believe that certain things are right and wrong, right? No one's disputing that most human beings in general believe that things are morally right and things that are morally wrong. What we're saying is, if naturalism is true, if the natural world is all that exists, that's a kind of illusion. It's a kind of illusion. You are sort of, you're wired to think that way, although those thoughts don't correspond to reality. And so we want to look at that. But Paul, share any thoughts you have on anything we've gone through so far.
Yeah, well, that point that you raised about atheists bringing up the objection of I am a moral person, and are you saying that I can't be moral just because I don't believe in God? One philosophical distinction to draw here for the audience, the difference between moral epistemology and moral ontology. Now, epistemology is a term that's used in philosophy. It's the study of knowledge, how we know things. So the theist who's making the moral argument is not making a claim about epistemology. The theist is not saying that we have to believe in God in order to know morality and to be moral. That's not the claim that's being made. The claim that's being made is one of moral ontology. Ontology is the study of being, that there can be no such thing as the moral realm. There is no such thing as moral reality. There's no such thing as moral fact, moral values, moral obligations, if God does not exist. So it's a matter of, do these moral features exist if God does not exist? It has nothing to do with believing in God, or, that it has nothing to do with how we know what's moral and what's immoral. So epistemology and ontology, two completely separate issues. Yeah.
Now, for those of you who are out there watching, we're using fancy terms that philosophers use. There are some people who say, hey, don't use those terms, they might confuse people. We believe that people and viewers can learn terms even if they're unfamiliar to you. So we try to break things down as we go along. But in general, if you're watching programs on apologetics and so on, you probably have an interest in learning things. So we are going to use terms. We'll try to explain them as much as possible. And as far as the distinction between epistemology and ontology, if you don't want to learn, exactly what the words mean, at least get the idea down of what we're saying here. I can know that this computer works. Like if I never thought about how computers are made, or what makes them work, or what makes them run, I can know that a computer works without knowing that electricity is necessary for it, right? I could know that my computer works without understanding that it requires electricity, because I could just have no clue what electricity is. But the point is, electricity is required. So there I could know that the computer works without knowing what's required for it to work. And so what we're saying about God and morality is, you can know certain things are right and wrong without knowing what's required for those things to be right or wrong. So you could know that rape is wrong just because you have this sort of horrible revulsion at it. However you learned it, however you came to learn it, you could know that it's wrong without really understanding that something is required for this to be wrong. In order for the statement "rape is wrong" to be true, it's got to be more than just the way you see things, just your own personal preference. There has to be something that makes that fact true. Paul, one more distinction. We talked about in the video. They mentioned objective and subjective. Could you distinguish between those for us?
Yeah, an objective, when we talk about something being objectively true, we mean that the truth is inherent in the object itself. So when I say that it is objectively true that there's a cup in my hand, the truth of that statement is in the object. It's in the fact that there is a cup here in the room. It's a feature of the world. Now, when I want to make a subjective claim, I'll say something like, vanilla is better than chocolate. Now, that's a claim that's true about me in the subjective, but it doesn't hold true about the world. There's no objective meaning to the statement, vanilla is better than chocolate. Although someone might want to make the case for it, it's all about preference. So the question we're asking is morality more like, the cup in the room, or 2 + 2 = 4? Is that the kind of thing that morality is? Or is morality more like, I like vanilla better than chocolate? So we need to answer that question. And I think most people would agree, actually, that morality is more like mathematics, more like the objective features in the world, rather than preference and subjective statements. Because then we get into all sorts of messy situations when we embrace subjective morality.
All right, so there's no problem. I mean, people can raise objections. Atheists can raise objections about how theism can ground morality. But if we just think about it, if certain moral facts are true, and we say that there are objective moral values, that there are moral values that are that are right, that certain things are right or wrong, regardless of our opinion, well, that would mean that it's not just in our minds, it's somewhere out there. And so if God exists, well, that is somewhere out there, right? There is something higher than just our personal opinions and preferences. So it's not really difficult, unless someone's being really nitpicky, it's not difficult to see how God would be the ground of objective moral values and duties. If we have a creator, and this creator is perfect in goodness, well, there is, that's the foundation. So theists, we might have a difficulty, saying certain things are right or wrong, because there are different cultures around the world, and some people do have differences in there. So we might have difficulty saying that some specific view is, this is a moral fact about the world, because imagine a culture where they believe that spitting on the ground is the worst thing you could do. Well, that's not a moral fact. Most of us wouldn't regard that as a moral fact. So we can have disagreements about what moral facts are, but the point is, if you believe that there are objective moral facts that are more than just our personal preferences, then we say you're stuck with theism, or something very different, at least from naturalism. But, and here's the but. So that's as far as theists are concerned. If you're an atheist, and in general we're talking about naturalists, not some atheist who denies the existence of God but believes in something else, some other sort of higher power, something like that. We're talking about the strong sense of the naturalist, the person who believes that the physical world, the natural world, is all that exists. If you want to reject this argument, there are kind of two general directions you can go. One, you can say that there are moral facts, but those don't require God, they require something else. There's some alternative that can make certain statements like rape is wrong. There's things that can make those statements true without God. Or you can say that there are no moral facts. You can sort of bite the bullet on that. I had a debate recently with an atheist, Hina Dadaboy, who was a former Muslim who's now an atheist, and by the end of the debate, she just flat out said, no, there are no moral facts about the world. It's all our opinion. So Paul, atheists have these sort of two different directions that they can go, and what are the problems with each way? And just pick whichever one you want to discuss first.
You want me to do this in a couple minutes? That's like insurmountable challenge.
No. Pick one, and we'll focus on that before the break, and then we'll take the other approach after the break.
Okay. So I think that if you deny objective morality, that's probably the easier one, and the one that we could probably spend a shorter amount of time on, because it's just so easy to refute, I think. If someone denies that there are such things as objective moral facts, objective moral duties, and moral obligations, we have a name for people like that, and we call them sociopaths or psychopaths, okay? And now most of the people who say that there are no such things as moral facts, they're not sociopaths, they're not psychopaths. They're simply paying lip service to a kind of subjectivism or anti-realism, the term that you brought up before, but they're not really living consistently that way. If someone really were living consistently, believing that there are no such things as moral values, then they end up, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, Adolf Hitler, these kinds of people, because that is the ultimate. If there are no restraints, if you believe that there are no such things as moral facts, if there are no duties that are upon us towards one another, then there's nothing restraining you from doing whatever your heart desires, exploiting people and getting to the top. And a lot of these people, everyone has their own cause that they like to champion. So an atheist might think that religion is immoral, or people who try to force their beliefs on others are immoral. But by making these sorts of claims, you believe that there is an objective morality. By telling someone else it's immoral for you to evangelize or to think that homosexuality is a sin, that's immoral for you to believe that, you're making a judgment on that person. So you're appealing to a standard outside of yourself. You're saying that for both me and for you, this law is true, that we ought not force our opinions on others, that kind of thing. So no one really espouses this idea that there are no such things, there are no moral facts at all. And if someone does, all you need to do is press them on some issues. Everyone acknowledges that rape is wrong. Everyone acknowledges that torturing children for fun is wrong. Exploiting people to get what you want. These are wrong things, and we treasure and we value empathy and kindness and honesty and keeping our promises. These are universally held and accepted by most people. So I think it's very difficult to sustain a case arguing that there are no such things as objective moral facts.
Yeah, and this has come up in a variety of ways in my life, both as an atheist and as a Christian. But when I was an atheist, I would of course maintain that there is no real right or wrong, that it's do whatever you feel like doing. There's no real reason not to, and I would be classified as a sociopath in that I had no problem just treating people horribly or getting violent. But at the same time, if I caught someone lying to me, I'd go ballistic, right? I wanted to destroy this person. If someone did something wrong, or someone was, just anything annoyed me, I would become enraged. And why? I'm regarding it as something wrong. They're doing something wrong. But if I was really consistent, it would have to be, no, they're not doing anything wrong. And so why would I be so enraged? And so people who actually want to say there are no objective moral values, there are no moral facts about the world, really they're only like that with things that are in their own interest. When it comes to things other people are doing, suddenly if you get right down to it, they're going to say things are wrong. Another interesting way that this has come up was in the debate I mentioned, and there are tons of debates and so on. This is just in my recent memory because it just happened. But when I debated Hina on this topic, much of her presentation was on how God shouldn't have done. If God existed, He wouldn't have done things like this, and He would have done them some other way. And God would be a sadist if He did this, and God would be cruel if He did that. And what kind of horrible God would do all these things? And then, of course, later in the debate, she said, "No, there are no moral facts about the world." Well, if there are no moral facts, right? If there's no true statement, here is what someone must do in order to be good. What in the world are you doing saying that God should do all these things? You have no basis for saying what God should and shouldn't do. You don't believe in any sort of values that you could apply to God. So the moment you're saying what a perfect being would have to do, you're making sort of two claims. One, you're saying that there are moral values and duties that would apply beyond us. So they're objective, right? It's not just personal opinion or even the position of the state or government or culture or anything like that. You're saying here are things that even God would have to do. So you're saying, one, there are these moral values, but you're also saying, two, that you have access to them, that you, an atheist who doesn't even believe in objective moral values, are nevertheless aware of moral values that would apply to God. Do you not see the incoherence there? Do you not see the problem? You atheists who are watching and you take this position, there are no objective moral values and duties. Such things do not exist. Nevertheless, I am aware of moral laws that would even apply to God. What are you talking about? What sort of nonsense are you talking? And I'm pointing this out because even though there are lots of atheists who don't take this approach, there are enough who take this approach to be really, really disturbing. I've seen various people from the group American Atheists try to ground, living in a certain way based on selfishness, right? Based on selfishness. They say, look, you've only got one life. You want to enjoy it as much as possible, but to enjoy it as much as possible, we need to be a law-abiding society. It can't be chaos and anarchy. So we all have to play by the rules in order to get as much out of life as possible, and therefore, just out of selfishness, just out of your own personal desire to have a long, full life, well, we have to abide by the rules. And just think about that, trying to ground morality and ethics in selfishness, what you want. But that's the sort of thing that you're stuck with. There's nothing really right or wrong out there. There's nothing really right or wrong. It's just we all understand we're selfish, and so we have to try and come up with some way of living like that. Now the problem is when someone says, actually, I don't care about living a long life. I'd rather go out with a bang now than live a long life. You can't say it's wrong. You just say, well, you don't have this same sort of desire for a long, fruitful life that the rest of us have. That's a problem. And what's odd is those same groups, those same American atheists will complain about religion is immoral, and such is immoral, and it's immoral what religion has done and Christianity has done. Look at all these things that are wrong. And what are you talking about? That makes no sense on your worldview. And so this is what Paul is getting to, and what I'm getting to, that there is a massive incoherence. You can say the words, there are no objective moral values, there are no objective moral duties. You can't live that way. You can't live that way as a human being. And as a general rule, if your worldview, taken seriously, if you actually tried to live it out, would be unlivable, you might want to think about whether your worldview is correct. All right, Paul, we have 6 or 7 minutes before the break. What do you want to add to that?
I'd like to actually keep going with this denial of objective morality and some more of the implications that it leads to. So you brought up if an atheist denies that there are objective moral facts, then they lose all right and ability to argue from the problem of evil, like you pointed out. If there is no such thing as right and wrong, then you can't say, oh, well, God shouldn't have done this, God ought to do this, people have value, how could God allow this to happen? All of that totally just goes up in smoke because people lose value, people lose dignity. There are these no more normative oughts, that people ought to do things and ought not do things. That just totally goes up in smoke. But another thing, we can never condemn any wrongdoing. So we can never say that the Holocaust is wrong. We can never say that the rape of Nanking or Nanjing is wrong. We can never say that, torturing a small girl, locking her up and starving her instead of taking care of her. Like, we can never say that that is wrong. Then it's an unlivable consequence of that worldview. No one really wants to take up that position that we can't condemn those actions. In the same way that we can't really praise anyone for doing anything. So if you devote your life like Mother Teresa, living with orphans, or you give all your money to the poor, that's no different than, someone who goes and exploits people to get to the top. All values are relative in this moral space. And lastly, the idea of moral reform, it just doesn't exist at all. Because when we talk about reforming society and, look at our societies now, we've reformed so much since antiquity and biblical times, and in the 1800s when Christians used the Bible to enforce slavery and justify slavery, now we've evolved, we've reformed. But if there is no such thing as an objective morality, a standard that we're moving and growing toward, then there is no such thing as moral reform or moral improvement. We can say that we've changed our morality, we have, but to say that something is improving or reforming means that we're moving closer to the ultimate good. And if there is no such standard, then we can't say that there is a such thing as moral reform. It just doesn't exist. Moral improvement doesn't exist. And we can say that people change their morals, certainly, but we can't say people go from good to bad or bad to good.
Mm-hmm. And so, again, you would end up with really an unlivable life in the sense that I do not think you could live this way, right? I do not believe. I am convinced that you cannot live as a person who really takes that claim seriously. There are no objective moral values and duties. Again, you can say it. You can say the words. But if you were to really live this way, you could not say that anything is right or wrong. If someone does something to you, you would have to realize that any sort of reaction of rage that the person has done something wrong, morally wrong, is a kind of illusion. So you'd have to suppress that reaction because it's based on an illusion, and who wants to base what they do on illusions? And so you have some serious implications. And which really, the point here is, given the implications, before you want to make that leap that there are no objective moral values, you might want to seriously think about why you would say something like that. And the real reason is that lots of people understand, deep down they understand that first premise, that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist, right? And they think, well, God doesn't exist, well, therefore, I'm stuck with the idea that objective moral values and duties don't exist, even though it's unlivable and even though, this is going to cause all kinds of problems. But I'm going to bite the bullet and do that because I don't believe God exists. The point we're trying to make here is you have moral experience, right? It's a different kind of experience than your experience of the world, but it is experience, right? When you say something is right, or you see a soldier throws himself on a grenade to save those around him, is that really right? When we honor people for things that they have done, when we give out medals and awards for people's achievements or heroism, when firefighters are marching up the stairs of the World Trade Center as it's burning, when someone runs into a fire to save someone, is that sense you get, that feeling, whatever you want to call it, that someone has just done something wonderful, is that no more than some kind of feeling? Does that correspond to reality? Or when you see, when you hear about female genital mutilation and honor killings and the horrible tortures of prisoners of war and the Holocaust, as Paul pointed out, and you say, oh, how could anyone do that? Is that based on something other than a personal preference like, well, I just don't like that, it makes me feel bad? Is it something more than you don't like that because you've been conditioned to think that way? Is it something more than that? That's the question. And so the point here is, why should you think, well, I don't believe in God, therefore, heck, let me just bite the bullet, and all this moral experience that I have, it's all just based on illusion. There's a huge step to make, and it's shocking how quickly people will make that leap. I made it as a teenager. I'm a teenager. I obviously haven't thought all these things through to their logical conclusion. I hadn't seriously and in depth investigated the existence of God or Christianity or these issues, and yet I'm making this huge, massive, worldview-shaking decision about something as essential as whether there are objective moral values and duties. So the point here is, why are you throwing that out? Why are you throwing that out? If your worldview, hey, I'm rejecting God, forces you to throw out a lot of experience, maybe you want to think about throwing that worldview out. Like if you said, if God doesn't exist, then the world around me doesn't exist. Oh, okay, well, I don't believe in God, therefore I'm going to throw out the world around me. We don't have that. We don't use that argument. But the point is, if believing in God did require you to reject all the experience around you, wouldn't you start thinking about whether or not you should be rejecting the existence of God? Right? Because that's a huge. I can't make sense of the world if all this is just some sort of illusion, right? So again, we're not making that argument, but we're making a similar argument in that you have a lot of experience that only makes sense if God exists. And so why would you reject all that just because you're rejecting God? You should rethink whether you should be rejecting God. All right, we have to take another quick break, and when we get back, we mentioned that there are two ways you can go. There are two directions you can go as an atheist. We know the direction theists are going to go. Christians are going to go. But if you're an atheist, if you want to say God does not exist, you can go in two different directions. You can say, well, therefore objective moral values and duties don't exist, and all my moral experience is just a kind of illusion. Or you can say, no, my moral experience is real in that it corresponds to something outside of me. There are moral facts about the world. There are things that are right and wrong. There are things that are genuinely, objectively good and bad. But God is not required for that. And so the question would be, what is it that can make these things right or wrong? And we're going to come back in just a moment, and Paul's going to go through what the possibilities are for the atheist. Where are you going to ground it? What is going to be the foundation for morality if you're a naturalist, if you reject the existence of God and all you have is this world? how are you going to defend certain claims that certain things are right and other things are wrong? How are you going to do that? We'll be back in just a moment to discuss that here on the Trinity Channel.
TrinityChannel.com. TrinityChannel.com.
Welcome back to the Trinity Channel. We are discussing the moral argument for God's existence. We discussed what the moral argument is. We watched a video by Dr. William Lane Craig on that topic. We pointed out that how the basic argument ties together. But now we've been talking about what the atheist can do with this, right? Because the atheist can either bite the bullet and say, well, morality is just a kind of illusion. It doesn't have any basis other than my own personal preference, or that certain things are still right and wrong, but it's something else it's not God that makes them that way. It's something else that makes them that way. So we want to look at that claim. We do have a caller first, so we don't want to keep the caller waiting too long. So let's go ahead and take the caller, and then we'll finish off this presentation. Hi, who do we have on the line?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to give a brief testimony. My name is Mark Bennett. I actually run the blog AnsweringAbraham.com.
Oh, yeah, we know you.
Yeah. Originally, it started as an atheistic kind of response to the Abrahamic religion. That was going through the year about 2008 to 2014, but last year, about the time of March, I actually realized that I had no more reason left to remain an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually became a Christian, and I guess some of the main arguments that convinced me, and I'm sure David could simplify this, but one of them was the ontological argument, the transcendental argument,
mm-hmm.
and the teleological argument, which, William Lane Craig put a video out on that fine-tuning argument there as well. And also, David had a great video on YouTube called The Argument from Reason,
mm-hmm.
and there's another similar argument by Plotnick called The Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those are the kinds of arguments, along with the moral arguments, that ultimately convinced me that I was irrational. I don't even think intelligibility and meaning is possible without God. I think that was really the crux for me. Just to let you guys know, there's actually quite a big group of us, Powertalk and Spark, who are listening to you, along with you probably know him, Radical Moderate, Robert,
yeah,
and Jay Hub. Yeah. So I just thought I'd share that, guys, just to let you know that, yeah, you guys, you've really briefed me. Even though, and I used to even debate David and Sam Shimon on the issue of morality in the Old Testament, and yet now I've actually changed my view. Thanks.
Oh, absolutely. I remember you, and you were quite brutal. You were quite brutal in in the comment section. Hey, thank you for that, brother. And if you want, I wouldn't mind doing a show where you can go into a little more depth about your background and the things you saw over time. In other words, we could dedicate a show to that. So please contact me.
Yeah, terrific. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Okay, yeah, send me a message and I'll get back to you. Matter of fact, send me your email, send it as a comment. I won't post the comment, and then I'll just I'll respond to. Then I'll have your email.
God bless you guys. Thanks, David and Paul. Good.
All right, thank you, brother. And so yeah, you have. He pointed out that he likes the ontological argument and the transcendental argument. We talk mostly about differences between Christianity and Islam on these programs, just because I think that's needed. There's a lot of work that's been done in apologetics, involving atheism and naturalism, but not nearly enough in Islam. That's one of the main reasons that I talk about Islam a lot. I'm actually more interested in atheist objections, but I recognize the need in Islam. But at the same time, these are great arguments to discuss. Ontological argument, the transcendental argument, and different people find different arguments appealing. Some people look at the ontological argument and go, no, it sounds like you're playing word games there or something like that. Other people, that will be completely persuasive to them. And so it's good to really get wide exposure to the various arguments. But right now we're looking at one that some people find incredibly interesting. Paul, so an atheist can say that objective moral values do not exist, but in practice is not going to be able to live that. And if you have that kind of disconnect, why you're affirming some belief in your head while you cannot possibly live it, I would say it's just you've got a problem there, and you have no right to tell me to take your worldview seriously if that's what it requires of you. But there are other atheists, many atheists, who would say that they do have a basis for right and wrong and for good and bad, and that therefore they're not being incoherent in the way they're living. So what would be some of the difficulties here?
So you want to go into some of the objections, some of the atheist attempts to try to ground objective morality? Yeah. So I think the most popular one is trying to go the route of evolution, and to try to ground objective morality in our evolutionary history. It's interesting because Richard Dawkins published in 1976 The Selfish Gene, which is a really popular book, very often quoted by Christians and non-Christians, trying to pull out some of the implications and conclusions of his work, that we are just machines for propagating DNA. And so it's a very pessimistic, bleak view of mankind, that we're just these propagating machines, these sacks of cells that our number one desire and tendency is to make more sacks of cells. And it's all very reductionistic and bleak. But in the year 2000 or so, there was a bit of a shift in the evolutionary biology and sociobiology literature. Now lots of scientists are arguing that, okay, yes, we have these selfish tendencies, but the only way that we can survive as a species is through cooperation. So we need to come together. We have some kind of herd morality and tendencies that were ingrained into us over a long period of time, that inculcated into us these desires and tendencies for altruism, fairness, justice, and things like this. And because we have to work together as a group, as a species, it's for that reason that we have morality today. So we don't need to look to God. We can just look at the way that we evolved as a species. We're social animals, so we have pro-social proclivities, and we need each other to work together. If someone's not pulling their share, then the whole community suffers. So it is in our best interest to live by these tendencies that we have ingrained into us by evolutionary history, and so we don't need God. That is essentially the gist of that.
Now, everyone really needs to get that down, because that's kind of all you've got. You've got once you go this direction, in other words, you're not willing to say that there are no objective moral values, there are no moral facts about the world. You've decided no, certain moral statements are true and false, and there are moral facts about the world. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to ground it? now you have this further decision of trying to ground it in your evolutionary history, of trying to ground it in society, in the sense that society is more than you, and so it could possibly ground it. But as far as evolutionary history grounding morality, as Richard Dawkins points out on naturalism, the reason you're here is that your ancestors outcompeted others. They did a better job surviving and reproducing. So that's what organisms do. They try to survive and reproduce. Those that do a better job of it will pass on their genes. Therefore, at the end of the day, you are a machine. Your body is a machine for passing on your DNA. Earlier on, it was other organisms, and some were more successful because of they got to pass on more genes than others, and so that's why we're here. So you are a machine for making copies of DNA. So that is a really, really rough view. You are nothing but a machine for passing on your genetic information. That's all there is. So what you can do, where you can go with this, is to say, well, it's in my best interest. I'm going to pass on the most genes if I'm in a society living harmoniously, rather than I'm out in the woods and it's every man for himself and we'll just kill and slaughter each other over a sandwich or whatever. We don't want to go that route. That wouldn't be good for me to pass on my genetic information, and so we need this herd morality. It helps that we have compassion. It helps that we look out for each other. It helps that we have expectations and we praise behavior that's going to help others, and that we look down on people who are just going around killing and things like that. So all of this helps, and so it's good for society, and so it's good in that sense, and that's what we really mean by good. Now, Paul, is there a problem with this?
Yes. One second, I just wanted to go back. Speaking of Richard Dawkins, okay, so he's come up a couple of times. Just so people don't think that we're making stuff up or misconstruing his view, if we could go to the first slide that I had prepared. We have some quotes there from Richard Dawkins from The Selfish Gene. Mm-hmm. Do we have them up?
Are those on the first slide?
Should be.
Okay, yeah. Let's get the first slide up so we can see it. We put some quotations up in case we wanted to have them up on the screen. Let's look at the first slide. All right, we have it up.
We have it? Okay, good. So we should have 3 quotes there. Is that what we're looking at?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so this is from Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, 1976. A couple of quotes just to give you a very cursory overview of his position. Let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish. Let us understand what our selfish genes are up to, because we may then at least have the chance to upset their designs, something that no other species has ever aspired to do. Now notice what he's saying here. His view, his position is that our instinct, our natural tendency is towards selfishness, but for some reason, we ought to not live by that. First of all, he's saying we have the power to not live by those selfish tendencies, which is kind of unjustified and has its own problems. But 2, for some reason, he's not explaining where he's getting this from, but there's another moral code that we ought to live by that tells us we ought to reject the selfish gene paradigm, and we need to teach generosity and altruism because these are not natural. We need to go against the natural design of evolutionary history, which is the selfish gene. We are here for propagating DNA, no more, no less. We need to go against that, fight against that, and be altruistic and generous. So this is his position here. He values these 2 things, altruism and generosity. It says we don't get them from evolutionary history. We need to fight against the selfish tendencies, but that's all that we have on evolution. This is Richard Dawkins' view. Did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so the second quote, we are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. This is the truth which still fills me with astonishment. Again, we are just survival machines, very reductionistic, very bleak. And again, we alone on Earth can rebel against the tyranny of the selfish replicator. So you see this theme throughout his book. He even titled the book The Selfish Gene. His view is that evolutionary history has predisposed humans towards selfishness, because all we're here for is propagating DNA. Patricia Churchland has what she calls the 4 F's, the 4 main drives of humanity.
Watch
so all we want, we have fighting, fleeing, feeding, and reproduction. Okay, so these four drives are what comprise the human essence, what it is to be a human being, a Homo sapien. And so all we can get from that view is that we should pass on our DNA. It's a really bleak reductionistic view. Now, this view is not really as entrenched as it was in 1976. Evolutionary biologists are moving towards more social theories and cooperation and things like that. But this is just to summarize Richard Dawkins' view so people don't say that we're making stuff up or taking him out of context or mischaracterizing his position.
Now, Dawkins is just, I mean, a classic example of sort of the incoherence of trying to have it both ways, right? We are just, we are just machines for propagating DNA. We're selfish because that's what our genes are. Our genes want to reproduce more than anyone else does. It's not, they don't have that desire, but that's just what they're programmed to do, and that's how life works. But then he will turn around and not only say, "Oh, but we can rise above that." Like, what do you mean? What is it right to rise above that? Is there something that makes it good and honorable and noble of us to rise beyond what? I mean, what is there? What is there, right? But then it'll go on, and religion is evil and immoral, and look at all the horrible things done in the name of God, and God is evil, and blah blah blah. What are you talking about? What do you are a machine for propagating DNA on your worldview. And that's the real problem is Richard Dawkins will affirm in one breath, I am nothing but a machine for propagating DNA, and then live like he's much, much more than that, and like he's talking to things that are much, much more than machines for propagating DNA. And so that's the incoherence, that's the tension. There are people like Dawkins who want to reject objective moral values because they understand I got a problem here, but they just can't do it. They just can't do it. And even to attack God and to attack religion, they need to live as if there are these objective moral values that they have access to and they're aware of, and they're aware of how God should live, and they're aware of what Christians are doing that's wrong. So it's weird, and so if your worldview does this to you, if your worldview forces you to live in this incoherent, nonsensical manner, to say one thing while you cannot live that way, again, you've got a problem here, and you need to try and deal with that. All right, so Paul, that's Dawkins. What about more recent attempts to ground it that are grounded in this sort of herd morality? Right.
So now, if you are an evolutionary biologist or a primatologist or a behaviorologist or any one of these other ologists, you will take the view that you observe primates and other social mammals exhibiting behavior that is beneficial towards survival. They cooperate, and that's beneficial towards survival. They mourn, they console each other, they care about justice and fairness. Loads of experiments done to confirm these hypotheses with bonobos and chimps and voles and lots of other animals. There are 5 problems, okay? So there are 5 problems that I've isolated as that debunk this attempt at grounding morality in evolutionary ethics. So should we go down the list? Should we do the first one?
We'll have to go through them quick because we're almost out of time. Okay. But if we decide to really go through them more carefully on a future episode, we can do that too. But yeah, give it to us kind of quickly.
So let's do it really quick. The first problem is that the evolutionary sciences themselves undermine our justification for believing that there are morals. So David, let's say that when you were young, a scientist gave you a pill that caused you to believe that George Washington was the first president of the United States, okay? And this pill also removed from your memory the fact that you were ever given such a pill. Now, your whole life you grew up thinking that George Washington is the first president. And then 20 years later, this scientist meets you again and tells you, oh, by the way, David, you believed your whole life that George Washington was the first president because I gave you this pill. Your belief is solely the product of that pill. Now, would you say that your belief is now unjustified? You now have no good reasons for believing that because it was the product of a pill.
Yeah.
Right. So in the same way, when we study evolutionary history, The evolutionary sciences tell us that morality is a method for survival. There's no deeper meaning. It's illusory. It's just a function for getting us to propagate DNA, okay? That removes from us the justification for thinking that these moral beliefs really should hold. So we're now outside of the matrix and we're looking in and we're saying, hey, actually, I don't have to live by these. This is just put into me by our evolutionary history. My genetics want me to do this in order to help my tribe survive, in order for me to propagate DNA. But if I don't want to, there's nothing really telling me that I have to buy into this. If I don't want to buy into the system, there's nothing that tells me I have to. So just studying the evolutionary history itself undermines justification and takes away our reasons for believing that these are true, if there's no God. So this is on the atheist position. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, keep going, keep going.
Keep going. Okay. Second, we have the naturalistic fallacy. So the naturalistic fallacy is trying to reduce goodness to that which is natural. If you try to say we ought to console each other and be cooperative because that's what we observe in these pro-social mammals, we observe this with bonobos and chimps, that commits the naturalistic fallacy. You can't say that something is good simply because it's natural. You're totally destroying the definition of goodness when you do that. Some of the implications of that.
Yeah, lions. A male lion is going to New Pride will kill all the young lions that were there before.
Right.
And I mean, no, it would never occur to someone to say, therefore, it's the right or moral thing to do. It has nothing to do with any of that.
Sure. Yeah, and even with humans, we have things that are naturally occurring in us, genetic tendencies. For example, there are studies that show men that have less white matter in their brains, which is the connective tissue that allows neurons to send messages. Males that have less dense white matter have tendencies towards pedophilia. Now, does that mean that just because there's a genetic or natural tendency there, that therefore pedophilia is okay or good? Of course not. So we have to judge that which is natural by a standard above it. So we know that that which is natural is not the same as that which is good. Otherwise, we get into saying people have genetic tendencies for alcoholism. Alcoholism is good. People have genetic tendencies towards aggression. That's good. People have genetic tendencies towards pedophilia. That's good. We get into all these sorts of messy problems. We don't want to affirm those things are good. So it's for that reason that we can't collapse goodness into naturalness. That gets us into a whole host of problems. We'll skip over the is-ought fallacy because that's really similar. Is-ought fallacy is saying because something is the case, that doesn't justify moving to it ought to be the case. You can't say just because it is the case that pro-social animals, do these things that keep them together, that therefore we ought to keep doing that. There's a jump there, there's a gap that we can't really cross. It's called the is-ought gap, the is-ought fallacy. We can also say that evolutionary morality is arbitrary and contingent upon the evolutionary process that brought us here. So if we had evolved along similar lines to ants or lions, our morality might be totally different. Like you pointed out, a male lion goes into a new pride, kills off all the baby cubs. Ants enslave aphids, right? They force them to do work for them. Bottlenose dolphins, they will forcibly copulate with each other. Different species have different moralities. So our morality is totally contingent. It's completely a byproduct of the way that we evolved. So if we rewound the tape of evolution, played it over again, we might have totally different morality. And Darwin himself realized this. He has several quotes where he spells this out. And last, we can say that there is a big problem for people who want to affirm moral realism, objective morality, and believe in naturalism. This is called the Darwinian dilemma. I don't know if we're going to have time to get into this too much because this is sort of the main argument. This is
that's actually that's a great title for a show. So just give people the general idea, but that sounds like a great episode for a future show, the Darwinian dilemma.
Yeah, the Darwinian dilemma is an argument put forward by a philosopher named Sharon Street. Others like Michael Roos and Richard Joyce have also developed similar evolutionary debunking arguments. She argues that if you believe that there are objective moral facts and you believe in naturalistic Darwinianism, meaning you believe that there is no God and we evolved in the way we did, then there's a problem there because you have, on the one hand, moral facts that exist independently, and then you have values that are inculcated into us because of our evolutionary history, and you need to make sense of these. Now, there are two horns, it's a dilemma. You can either affirm a relationship between these two, say that the moral facts are somehow related to our judgments that were inculcated and ingrained to us by evolutionary history, that's one option, or you can deny them. And there are problems on both sides. If you deny that there's a relationship between morality and evolutionary history, then it's like saying, I got into a canoe on the coast of Manhattan and wanted to end up at Bermuda, okay, and all I had was the wind, no paddle, no compass, nothing. What tells us that the forces of evolutionary history will drive us to correct moral truth? There's no reason to think that getting into a boat on Manhattan with the forces of the winds blowing you, the tides pushing one way and the other, that will safely bring you to Bermuda. There's no correlation between evolutionary history and moral facts themselves. And the other option is affirming a relationship between moral facts and evolutionary history. When you do that, you end up with remarkable coincidences. And Sharon Street says that that's too much of a coincidence, that all of the values we hold as a product of evolutionary history are the same ones that align, that we observe in as objective moral facts. So there's too much coincidence there. Anyway, it's a really complicated, and we could talk about it. We could do an entire show, like David said. But that's the basic gist of it.
And so to kind of bring all this together, by the way, because we mentioned it earlier, and I got an email from a sister about this. The other alternative, if you wanted to ground it, you would have to ground it somehow in a culture or in the in the culture that you're in. Now the problem there is that doesn't do the job, right? Saying something is right or wrong because culturally that's what my culture teaches, then you're stuck, right? Because then you've just pushed it up one level. Because if you think about it, we look at a culture where if a girl dresses some way that her parents don't approve of, she can be beaten to death right there. There are cultures out there where that is the practice. A girl doesn't dress appropriately, she gets beaten to death. Are we a better culture? Are we a better culture than that? Well, you have no way of saying, and therefore you don't have a way of saying that what she is doing is wrong, or what her parents are doing is wrong or right, or in other words, what you're doing, if the opposite of what you're doing can be right or wrong in a different culture, what sense does it make to appeal to the culture as the source of right and wrong? And then you're stuck with something similar. How do you condemn Hitler, right? He had a different culture. How do you condemn any culture that you really disagree with? If there's a culture of cannibals, how do you say that's wrong? You can't, and so you're still stuck with the same problem of trying to live with this idea that everything is just fair game as long as it's part of a culture. And that's just weird. So here, sort of bringing this all together, just don't worry about every little detail, but try and get the big picture here. The point is, if you are an atheist, you have two directions you can go. If you want to still affirm that there are moral facts, if you want to be able to argue that Christians are bad, or that religion is bad, or that anyone's bad, or that anything's really right or wrong, then you have to say that there's something that makes it right or wrong, something more than just your personal taste preference. And so what are you going to say is the source? If you say it's evolution, you run into all kinds of problems. If you say we just evolved this way with these values, you run into all kinds of problems. There are other bed bugs reproduce by violent rape. What's that got to do with right or wrong? It doesn't. So how do you say how we evolve? That's what makes things right or wrong. So that's a dead end. You can't do that. You could say, well, my culture does it, but again, that doesn't help you. That doesn't help you. Cultures believe that all kinds of things are right and wrong. Cultures disagree. So who's right? Well, you can't say anyone's right, and so you still have no real ground of what makes something right or wrong. So you have no basis for affirming objective moral values and duties given a naturalistic framework. So your alternative is to just say there is no real right or wrong. It's all an illusion. But again, you cannot live that way. So you can either really have a fundamental confusion in your thinking that certain things are right and wrong when that just doesn't fit with your worldview, or you can affirm a position, there is no real right or wrong, and just have a completely unlivable worldview. You cannot consistently live that worldview. If that's what rejecting God does, has it ever occurred to you that maybe the reason that you can't escape this, that you can't escape that you cannot escape this really massive confusion is because that is actually incoherent. It's an incoherent position. And that it's because you were not made to live that way. You were not made to think that way. And that God is required to make sense of our experience, of all kinds of experience, but here, moral experience. Something you want to think about. And a lot of people, they go up and they watch some YouTube videos and they come to their worldview and haven't really gotten to the bottom of it. There are certain things you really need to dig into deeply to get the idea before you, decide, make decisions that are going to affect the rest of your life. And this would be one of those issues that you should really dig into. All right, well, we're out of time. Thank my friend Paul for sharing with us, and we'll definitely have Paul on some future episodes to go into more detail, because we know people are out there who are interested in moral philosophy and apologetics and these arguments. So we'll definitely have Paul back on. And we will be back on here in half an hour. We're going to be talking with a former French atheist who's now a theist. If you're thinking about Guillaume Bignon, you're wrong. It's a different French atheist. There are tons of former French atheists out there. We're going to talk to one, although we might play Guillaume's video since it'll be French night. So we'll see you in half an hour here on the Trinity Channel.